to the closed session meeting of March 11th, 2024. The time is 4:30 p.m. Madam City Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Duncan?
Here.
Councilmember Gardner?
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe?
Here.
Mayor Beaver?
Here.
Absent from this meeting is Mayor Pro Tem Venable.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to public comment. If there's any public speakers who wish to be heard, please fill out the comment slips in the back room and head on to our city clerk. Do you have any speaker slips, ma'am?
We do have one card for Mr. James Penman.
Mr. Penman? If you could just state your name, who you represent, where you live in the city, and as a reminder, sir, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor. James Penman, Milligan, Beswick, Levina, Knox, representing the recall proponents. Tonight in closed session, you'll be given a proposal by us. We've had an interesting situation develop in the case, as you know, and we have decided to file an appeal on behalf of our clients. Mr. Milligan and I discussed it with an appellate lawyer. Circumstances are very unique here. We have a case where a judge on August 24 disagreed with your attorney that the case was not moot, and he ruled that it was. He did not stop there. He went on and suggested to me that I file a motion for attorney fees. And then he followed that up by saying, I hope the clerk gives you an early date. Well, by the time we got to court, it was last Friday. By that time, some other things had happened. The anti-SLAPP motion was heard, and it was granted. And the judge made the specific finding in the anti-SLAPP motion that the statements of the recall petition were, quote, not false and misleading, but were protected legal speech, end quote. So the lawsuit you brought, the court found that it violated your constituents' constitutional rights, and the statements were not false and misleading. Now, I'm not sure why the judge decided on Friday that we were not the prevailing party and the city clerk was, and then turned around and awarded us costs. And by law, you cannot award costs except to the prevailing party. So attorney fees were not awarded, costs were. So we've got a real conflict here. What I'm saying is, isn't it time to end all of this nonsense? You're politicians, I'm a lawyer, but I'm also a politician. Some of you know that. I elected 7 times, lost a few races, learned more in those than I did on the ones I won. And I'm in a runoff right now for city council in San Bernardino. I would not want to go before my voters and hear and have to defend why 197 citizens, maybe down to 9, are having to come up with $85,000 out of their pocket to pay their lawyer to defend themselves in a case where the court ruled their statements were not false and misleading, but were constitutionally protected. When I was an elected city attorney, I wouldn't have wanted that. I wouldn't want it as a council member. I don't think you guys want it. Can't we just, in the words of Rodney King, all get along? You know, I've encouraged my clients to tone it down. You know, let what happens happen at the ballot box. Let's go back to civil council meetings where people talk and discuss and get this case behind us. You know, we're going to go ahead with the appeal, and that's going to cost you between $70,000 and $80,000. It means it costs the taxpayers. Why do that? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam City Clerk, are there any other comments?
We have no more cards.
Thank you. At this time, we will move into closed session. The time is 4:34.
Yes, yes, sir. Let the recording roll.
Good evening. It's nice to see the sunlight outside when we're starting these meetings. Sometimes, there's been times where we've adjourned and the sunlight was still out. That's always a good meeting too. All right, so I will call this meeting to order. This is the regular City Council Successor Agency and Housing Authority meeting of March 11th, 2024. The time is 6:03 p.m. And at this time, I would ask that Captain Walker please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready, begin.
Thank you, Captain. Madam City Clerk, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Duncan?
Here.
Councilmember Garner?
Here.
Councilmember Thorpe?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Venable?
Here.
Mayor Bieber?
Here.
All present.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. City Attorney, is there anything to report out of closed session?
Yes, Mayor. On the city manager performance evaluation, the city council will need to go back into closed session after the open session to conclude that evaluation. In terms of the item on litigation that's on the agenda, the city council by consensus gave authority to file a notice of appeal, but also took the settlement offer that was made at the beginning of closed session under advisement, and we'll be considering that in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Also, Mayor, the city clerk did request an opportunity to make a statement about the closed session item.
All right, and when would be appropriate to do that?
Now it's fine.
All right, Madam City Clerk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. On April 24th, 2023, I, in my official capacity as the city clerk for the city of Yucaipa, received 3 notices of intention to recall members of the Yucaipa City Council. This last year has really been something else. I've sat here listening to comments questioning my authority, my character. I've heard blatantly false accusations and have remained fairly quiet with the exception of a few quotes in local newspapers. I'd like to just clarify a few things from my perspective. During the 10-day review period, as authorized by Elections Code 11042.5, I determined that the statements submitted by the proponents were, in my opinion, false and misleading. That was my opinion. At that time, I contacted the city attorney and expressed my concerns. The city attorney directed me to contact special outside counsel. I interviewed a couple of different law firms who both agreed with my concerns and both indicated that they would be willing to represent me. I ultimately selected Brad Hertz and the Sutton Law Firm. I selected Brad Hertz, and we moved forward with the filing of a writ of mandate. My goal in filing this writ was to have a judge read through the statements and determine whether in fact they were false and misleading. I was asking that a judge strike any language that was false and misleading. Although I knew it was possible that a judge could sustain the statements, I was confident that I would prevail in getting an order to correct the false and misleading statements. I expected the judge to rule on this case before the expiration of the 90-day circulation, and I was disappointed that didn't happen. I take my responsibilities as the elections official very seriously. The decision to move forward with the writ was not an easy one to make, but ultimately I felt it was my responsibility to protect the voters. I wholeheartedly believe in every citizen's constitutional right to circulate a recall as long as it's done truthfully and factually. While I'm happy that the judge did not award fees and indicated that I was the prevailing party, I wish we could have had a speedy ruling on the merits on the case. The bottom line here is that this was my decision. I'm a professional and I will continue to do what I believe is right. I stand by my decision and still believe it was the right one. I've invited my attorney, Brad Hertz, to further discuss the details of the case.
Mr. Hertz. The podium to your left, sir, is the one that's wired.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Brad Hertz. I'm a partner at the Sutton Law Firm. We do campaign and election law and public interest law for public entities and private parties in the political and election and governmental process. Ms. Sauceda, your city clerk, contacted me when the first 3 recall notices were submitted and asked me to review them as far as whether I believe there was a good faith basis for suing on the grounds that they're false and misleading. There was a new statute that just went into effect January 1st, 2023, by which the state legislature created a right for city clerks in this instance to sue to protect the voters from false or misleading statements. Those statements are published in the newspaper, and then they're printed on the petition itself. So it's especially important that they're either statements of opinion, or if they're factual in nature, that they're accurate. So with Anna Sauceda's approval, we filed a lawsuit. The law did not specify whether you should sue the first proponent whose name is on the first page, or the top 10, or all of them. So we believed we had to sue all of them under the statute because it didn't say otherwise. We then worked with Mr. Penman as opposing counsel to make the case as manageable as possible so that not everyone would have to file a filing fee with the court. So we had representatives from each of the 3 recall efforts. We did some court appearances and status conferences. Ultimately, because right after we filed, it was made clear to us that the proponents were not going to stand behind their statements. They were going to walk away from those statements and eventually start over, which they've now done. But they didn't try to fight those statements in court. We were hoping, as the city clerk said, for a substantive ruling within that 90-day period, so that if the judge found that they were false or misleading, he could have amended or deleted that language, and there would have been something more accurate and not misleading to go to the voters. So fast forward, we've dismissed our case on our own, but there's a procedure called the Private Attorney General Statute. It's Code of Civil Procedure, Section 1021.5, and that allows a party who believed they were the prevailing or successful party and served a public benefit by their litigation, that they can still seek fees. I had expressed in several letters and in discussions with Mr. Penman, I didn't think his clients would qualify under either of those criteria, because in fact, I believe the city clerk was the successful or prevailing party, because her goal was to prevent these false and misleading statements from being circulated. She achieved that goal, and whether or not she ultimately dismissed her case versus getting a judgment was not the point. The second criterion for that statute is that the litigation has to serve a public benefit. And the court found, after we briefed it, an oral argument this past Friday, March 8th, that in fact, Anna, the city clerk, was the successful and prevailing party because she achieved the goal of her lawsuit. And that, so not only were Mr. Penman's clients not the successful or prevailing party, but their litigation of the case did not serve a public benefit, that they were defending their own interests in their statements rather than trying to benefit the public. So based on those criteria, the fee award, which was requested at, I think, an $85,000 level, was denied in its entirety. So the city and the clerk's office will not have to pay the fees for the proponents of the recall. Costs, which are a separate element, the actual filing cost for the court, other very specific and narrow and relatively inexpensive items were awarded to the proponents. I know I heard Mr. Penman saying he thought that was inconsistent. I think it was an effort to kind of split the baby, as it were, and not have the proponents be out of pocket for their filing fees. Mr. Penman actually included redacted copies of their checks where each proponent who appeared paid $435 to the court, and that's roughly the $4,000 or so. So that was taken under submission so that the court could get the exact number, but it'll be in the nature of $4,000. I think that was not proper, but I understand the motivation for it with the court. So I was pleased to be able to represent the city clerk in this first-of-a-kind case and to protect the voters from the false or misleading information.
Thank you, sir. Madam City Clerk, is there anything further?
No further comments, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on, changes to the agenda. Mr. City Manager, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the absolutely most enjoyable portion of any meeting, Yap's Dog of the Month. Who do we have visiting us today? Mia. She's gonna make me carrot. And she's a little baby German Shepherd. Oh my goodness. What, about 5, 6 months old?
Yeah, we think she's between 5 and 6 months old.
Man, I nailed that.
I love her to pieces, which is why I brought her tonight.
She
This
looks
is her in
like
her glorious face. She's unsure of what's going on here. Mia is one of our adoptables at Yaps. She's been a part of the Yaps blanket for a few months. She was incredibly skinny when she was found at 3 months old on railroad tracks with her brother. The foster that had her is actually one of the trainers and behaviorists that works with us at Yaps, so she's done a lot of socializing and loving on her, which is what makes her a big, soft, squishy, scaredy cat, but the sweetest puppy in the world. She is crate trained, she is spayed, she's fully vaccinated, and she is just waiting to continue to grow into her legs and her ears. We jokingly say she looks like she's part coyote. She is not. She is a German Shepherd. She's beautiful, and yeah, she's one of our kids that we've saved off the streets. We have tons of cuties at Yaps right now available for adoption. We do have 2 younger German Shepherd puppies that are only about 7 weeks old right now. They'll be available in the coming weeks. And we also have 2 big events, that one of which does directly benefit the citizens of Yucaipa. We're hosting a low-cost vaccine clinic at Yucaipa PD's station right here for the Endless Possibilities event. We did team up with Yucaipa PD for this, and we're gonna be offering rabies, distemper parvo vaccines, FVRCP for our kitties, and microchips at a lower cost to help people that maybe just need to get their pets vaccinated, but not a crazy exam fee or anything else. So vaccines are gonna range anywhere from $10 to $15. Which is still fairly under what a lot of other places quoted us, with the intent that we were trying to make pet care more affordable. We will have some harnesses and leashes and pet items there as well for giveaway for free, or we'll do a little bit of a thrift shop, so it's like a dollar store type thing. All the funds raised for that will go directly back to the animals at Yaps, so we can save more dogs like Mia. And April 21st, we have our 12th annual golf tournament, where we're gonna be right over at Yucaipa Valley Golf Course. We like to keep it in-house, and we're gonna have different games and best dressed costume, and we're still taking sponsors and players for that event, so.
Krista, did I also, the time has been flying by very fast, but I thought I saw a flyer near the freeway on the boulevard that says something about a 5K walk with your dog. Do we miss that?
Just passed. Yeah, that was when it was pouring buckets rain on the second. We were right at Yucaipa Regional. We did have 15 people show up.
Wow, that's good.
And we had one guy actually ran the 5K in the pouring rain. It was freezing. But the Yucaipa Lions are potentially going to host another one in the coming future.
Perfect,
So.
awesome. So is Mia, do you think she's too shy to do pictures with us?
I'll
or?
just carry her.
All
She'll
right,
be fine.
let's do some pictures.
Come on, Mia. You ready? Come here. I know, don't make me give a plumber's crack to everyone. Come on. She's big old Jenny. I love her so much. People. Work for it. Oh my God.
Squeeze in shoulder to shoulder. There you go.
Mia is crate trained. She does no tricks, believe it or not. She does like other dogs. She likes kids and cats. She's beautiful. I love her.
I already have 2 field trips.
What's 3? You could get a trio.
A lot of energy.
What do you think? Come on, you ready? She's like, I don't know.
I'm working on that, actually.
Good girl. Thanks, guys.
morale dog for the station. Oh, see? Hopefully next month we'll get a report back that Mia was adopted. Really good looking dog. All right. Moving on to the next item, this is public comment. If there are any speakers who'd wish to be heard, the public speaker slips are in the back next to Dr. Wong there, behind Dr. Wong. Go ahead and fill it out, take it down to our not public speaker, our clerk, our city clerk. She'll hand it to me. As a reminder, you have 3 minutes on each item. While recognizing you have your First Amendment right to say whatever you'd like, please be respectful of others to include their time. Try to keep things about the matters that this council has jurisdiction over. So we will move on to our first public speaker, Ms. Melanie Martindale, followed by Mr. Richard Frost.
Good evening. So I came here tonight because of a recent situation that a family member dealt with involving a City Hall employee, oak trees, and city ordinances. It's already been taken care of, but I came up with a solution involving the problem. The entire situation got me thinking that of a solution that could benefit the citizens of Yucaipa, City Hall employee, and the city itself. While I knew oak trees are a protected tree and cannot be cut down, I did not know that we needed a permit to trim those. So that was something new that we found out. One of the things I was thinking of that I'm pretty sure other people didn't know either. So I was thinking of proposing that tree trimmers that operate within our city limits actually pay for permits with your city to trim the trees. It will bring in income for the city. It will protect the citizens from having to worry about the city ordinances, and it protect the street. It would also satisfy the City Hall employee that got upset about the trees. So I just wanted to suggest that, let you guys consider it.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, Mr. Richard Frost, followed by Mrs. Colleen Wong.
Richard Frost, Yucaipa. There are people still asking about that 6th Street traffic circle on County Line Road. I mean, they made a lot of progress, and they said they had to get a new contractor. But it's been, what it is, they got it's supposed to be 4 lanes, going different directions. One of them is one of them is supposed to be one way, is a 2-way traffic, and the crossings aren't marked very well at night, and they barely stop. I don't think they know it's a traffic circle. And then they have the arrows there that that show which way traffic's going, and one of them is they have the traffic going towards a opposite arrow, so they have the arrow pointed at them. Some drivers are confused, maybe they're in the wrong lane or something like that. But it's a huge roundabout. But everyone's saying, how long are they? I remember last summer it was all just dirt, So now at least they've made some progress.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. I'm gonna ask the question just because I'm curious myself. Can we get an update?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, good evening. As you may recall, the reason why we had implemented that temporary traffic control measure was we were waiting for Edison to remove their utility poles. They completed that removal about 3 weeks ago. Just last week, Frontier and Spectrum did some of the work that they had to do. And this week, City Yucaipa staff is coordinating with the City of Cal Mesa to get traffic fully open there temporarily. I do want to note that there will be, South Mesa Water Company will be doing some work in the area, so you'll see some closures. They're not going to be permanent, but just, as they're doing the work. But the short answer is we will be working with City of Cal Mesa to get that open to traffic. We're hoping in the next 15 days.
Next 15 days. Thank you, sir. Mrs. Colleen Wong, followed by Dr. Hanson Wong.
I asked to speak in regards to the last issue about your, and she didn't call me up,
Well, this is the time for public comment, ma'am.
so I don't get to talk about the other agenda item.
What agenda item?
I wanted to talk about the settlement.
That's not an agenda item that's on open session, that's on closed session. ma'am.
Okay.
We had public comment for that at 4:30.
I see.
You can reserve that.
May Beaver, I asked you about a giveaway of 200 houses under the WISC plan. It was about, what I'd heard was 200 extra houses to, under the single family home zoning, supposedly to get the developers to go along with it. And you told me that this whole project wouldn't even go forward until the developer came forward with a concrete proposal on a concrete development. You said nothing had been given away, and you said you knew this for a fact because you were one of the approvers for such plans. I asked you about the vines and the wineries, and you said that hadn't even been marketed yet, and until they were bought and approved, they wouldn't be planted, and therefore my concerns about them, about wineries having no owners, wouldn't be a problem, because once they were sold, the wineries would belong to them. You didn't say that when the wineries fail, and 60% of new wineries do fail, the cities would become the owner. This is a pretty big deal not to mention. Or did the planning staff just neglect not to tell you about that little deal? Exactly who in the city council is an expert on wineries? I'd like to know that. How do you justify using the city's taxpayer monies to pursue being in the wine business? How many Yucaipans approve of this business? Consider people who don't drink, who are conservative with their finances, and so don't think farming is a good investment. Those who worry about exploiting farm workers, or who worry about drunk drivers, or just think the alcohol business is a bad business. Along with just overall poor planning on this project generally, you have twisted government regulations to suit yourselves and used the services of an unscrupulous political hack disguised as city's manager to push this WISP project forward. It is a poor plan designed to look good, but ultimately it serves very few people by making them rich, while the vast majority of Yucaipan citizens will pay both financially and with quality of life issues. For shame, every one of you that votes for this boondoggle. I honestly believe you will rue the day that you learned of this plan.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Hanson Wong? Followed by Mr. Ray Snodgrass.
Good evening. Thank you. Hanson Wong, Yucaipa. So, before you listen to the wine country specific plan, I would suggest that you ask for some clarification of things that was not clarified to me during the meetings or in looking at what they have. Number one, the financial impact to the city. They hired a firm that just gave the positives. When I asked about the financial negatives to the city, they said, well, they don't deal with something district. Anyway, financial, anyway, they don't deal with the negative portions. I think you should look at both the negatives and positives of it. And maybe I just missed it. I don't know why they picked a particular firm that could not deal with both the positives and negatives of the financial data. I think it's important, if you're going into the agriculture business, that they create data that would give you information on times when the economics are good, when they're moderate, and when they're poor, because again, agriculture goes up and down. It's never the same as some other things. This has been a 5-year plan, but during this 5 years, what information has been given out and what comments have they received? When I asked about it, they told me I should look it up myself. It was in the minutes. I think the city planners should look that up for you because you're the city council and give you exactly the meetings and how many pros and how many cons were that. The polls, the proponents of this particular plan is the city. And being that you represent the city and you're the city council, I hope that before they sent out the proponents' comments on the polls that they asked you about it and got you to agree to it, because that is on you, whether you knew it or not. So the city was the proponent on the meetings. Most of the information given were pro and very little bit were con, although in the actual report they did have a list on both sides that were given. There's 5 years needed to complete, and I was told we need to complete this quickly because we have some more urgent matters and matters that need to be taken care of. And in my line of work, if there's emergency trauma, I do that before I do the hangnail. So if there's things that are more urgent, they should have done that first and this second. The information, there was not enough time. There were only 2 meetings on the polls. There were only 3 meetings on given to the public, and there's still more comments given. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Ray Snodgrass.
Honorable Mayor and council members, my name is Ray Snodgrass, Walnut Grove Court here in Yucaipa. At the most recent Planning Commission meeting, many citizens, me included, witnessed a completely out of order tirade by a commissioner against 3 fellow commissioners. He acted as judge and jury regarding the morals and ethics of 3 commissioners that had worked on the city's ad hoc AVA Planning Committee, later renamed the Yucaipa Valley Wine Country Planning Committee. He did not make a single comment about the content of the proposed specific plan. Instead, he blasted the morals and ethics of 3 commissioners with his inappropriate and out-of-order statements, suggesting the 3 would be automatic yes votes and they should recuse themselves. This out-of-order assertion proved to be wrong. It is not within the purview of planning commissioners to judge the morals or ethics of fellow commissioners. He swore an oath to serve on the commission and to abide by the rules under which the commission operates. He even said his action is, quote, not legal, end quote. He should have stopped right there, but he didn't. Because of the development of any specific plan is establishing a plan and not a project. Taking a position of pro or con is appropriate and is not ethically or morally wrong. This has been explained numerous times by legal counsel, but has apparently fallen on deaf ears. Serving the planning commission as a planning commissioner is voluntary, without compensation, and requires a substantial amount of time and energy to do the job correctly. It should also be remembered that the action of the commission is a recommendation to you, the city council. If this particular commissioner does not wish to operate within the parameters of the oath he took, he should consider resigning. At the very least, he should be admonished for his inappropriate actions as a planning commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Snodgrass, would you please, if you're willing, email me your statements? Yes, thank you. All right. Madam City Clerk, are there any other public comments?
Only for items 13 and 15, Mayor.
Correct. Moving on to consent agenda. The consent agenda for this evening consists of items 1 through 11. Is there any member of the council or staff that wishes to remove an item from consent for further discussion?
I move approval.
We have a motion from Councilman Duncan for approval,
I'll second.
seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Venable. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Items 1 through 11 are passed. Moving on to discussion items, starting with item number 12. This one is going to be by Mr. Joe Perdetto, our Government Affairs Director. This is for the adoption of resolution opposing initiative to Stop the Taxpayer Deception Act Coalition.
Mayor and Honorable City Council, Joe Perdetto, Director of Governmental Affairs. I am here to present to you an item from staff to oppose the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act, and to join a coalition of governments in opposition to this measure. You'll see that this measure has been referred to by its ballot initiative number submitted to the Secretary of State and not its actual name, because many government agencies, the League of California Cities, think that it is deceptively named the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. It is eligible for the November ballot. Their deadline to submit it, to get it formalized, is in June. And at the moment, there's a process, and I'll go into why there's a question whether it'll be on the ballot or not. But it is helpful to know who's sponsoring this, and it's the California Business Roundtable. The California Business Roundtable is an organization, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with CEOs from the largest companies in the nation doing business in California. According to the CEO, the intent of this bill is to, he quotes Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown said he'd never support a tax increase that the people didn't first approve, and that the California Business Roundtable is simply taking that policy and implementing it into law. It sounds good, but the reality is it will make life-threatening loss of revenue to local governments. This slide kind of encapsulates some of the changes that this measure will implement. Some of the big ones for the state, which I think many people wouldn't disagree that the intent behind this to slow state spending is probably not ill-advised. So we'll go into the details and explain why it is potentially very harmful. One of the big things that this does is it changes how state taxes are approved. Right now, the legislature may approve a tax by 2/3 vote of the legislature or a majority vote of the state electorate. This measure would change that to require both a 2/3 vote of the legislature and a vote of the electorate. It would also nullify any taxes, local and state, approved since 2022, and require the voters to reaffirm those within 12 months. So you can imagine for many local cities that have adopted local sales taxes and have built their budgets on this, that is a scary thought, to lose that and have to go back to the voters and have it reaffirmed. Not only would they have to be reaffirmed, but this bill would also affect local taxes by requiring a 2/3 voters threshold. At present, all local taxes require a 2/3 voter threshold for special taxes. General taxes are a majority vote of the electorate. This would change that to a 2/3 vote regardless of whether it's special or general. So those cities could lose their revenue and then have to go back at a higher threshold. Our city doesn't have a sales tax at the moment that would be subject to this, so that doesn't hurt us as badly. But where we are affected is in the fees section. At present, fees have to be calculated according to the reasonable cost of providing a product or service. Ours are through fee studies. This measure would change that so that, one, fees have to be approved by the state legislature. They couldn't be delegated, which doesn't affect us directly, but it does make the work of the legislature significantly more difficult. But it also it changes it to not only say actual costs, but the minimum amount necessary. So right now, our fees are justified, but under this change, minimum amount necessary, it opens our fees to challenge and drastically increases the administrative costs of doing business. And I do want to point out that that is one of the hypotheses about why the Business Roundtable is pushing this initiative. There's a lot of propaganda on both sides. Some of the fear-mongering on the opposition side says the Business Roundtable wants to use this to create loopholes that require governments to lease them lands for actual costs rather than market costs. So theoretically, if a government agency owns land that they can rent at market cost, if their mortgage or debt service is very low, the theory is that corporations can challenge and force the government to lease at a lower rate. I don't know if that is the true motivation, but that is one of the speculations for why the Business Roundtable is pushing this. So to go back and kind of talk about the specific impact on the city of Yucaipa, if this measure passes, it will present very significant challenges to the administrative process of developing and administering fees, and can open the city to legal challenges on how those fees are developed. As I mentioned, there is a large coalition of cities, school districts, all kinds of special districts, the California League of Cities. The California League of Cities has been pushing this. They couldn't send a rep today, but wanted to support and show the importance that this measure has on local cities. But there's a three-pronged fight at the moment to oppose this. The first one is legal. The governor and the legislature filed a petition with the state Supreme Court to try and block this from getting on the November ballot. I'm not sure the likelihood that that happens, but that is prong one. Prong two is legislative. The legislature is working to get a measure on ACA 13, which would, if passed by the voters, require any initiative that institutes a voter threshold higher than a majority vote, that initiative would then have to meet that threshold. So without ACA 13, if this measure passes by a majority vote, it could force all taxes to get a 2/3 vote. The legislature did not think that was a fair way of doing business, so this is their way to counter that. And if it passes, would require this measure to pass by 2/3 vote, the same threshold that they're requiring future taxes to pass. I know it's a little complicated, but the state legislature has dealt with the Business Roundtable before, and they have a history of developing ballot initiatives like this as negotiating leverage. And in the past, the legislature has given concessions, but this time around, the legislature was not going to negotiate any further and devised this as a way to combat this initiative on the ballot. The third measure, or the third prong of the attack is political, which is what we're talking about now, and joining other cities and districts in opposing this measure in November. So again, to summarize, this measure is being opposed by many cities and districts throughout the state. The impacts are unambiguously bad. The state legislative analyst's office, nonpartisan analysis, has indicated that it would cause a severe drop in revenues for local jurisdictions and would increase the administrative costs of administering fees and create complications in government operations. So staff is submitting this to you to join those agencies in opposing this ballot measure. If there's any questions.
Thank you, sir. Just to clarify, you said the governor, so Gavin Newsom, and members of the legislature have already written to the California Supreme Court to keep this off the ballot? Okay. Going back to your first point regarding the and 2/3 vote, it would appear to me as though, from what I read there, we're just talking about the legislature being further involved in the we the people voting. I mean, 2/3 vote. If so, if 2/3 of the voters vote yes on an item, but the legislature does not, the bill would die, or the effort would die.
Actually, that's a good point. So it's a little text here, but voter initiatives would remain the same. So it only applies to taxes that the legislature passes. So the legislature presently can vote by a 2/3 vote and not have any voter affirmation and pass a tax, or the voters can approve it by a majority vote. This changes it to any legislative tax would require the 2/3 vote of the legislature and the voters, but the voters could also initiate their own unaffected.
Okay. Do we have any information regarding what agencies surrounding the city of Yucaipa have already joined this coalition? And what
Not-
kind of timeline are we looking at regarding joining this coalition?
Not off the top of my head, but it is a vast majority of cities and members of the League of California Cities, and I could look that up later. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But the pertinent, the timing of this is the sooner we join, the more impactful that the advocacy efforts are.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? No. Is there a motion to approve item number 12?
I move approval.
Motion by Councilman Duncan,
I'll second.
seconded by Councilman Garner. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you, Joe. Mr. Fermin Preciado on the Wildwood Canyon Road Engineering Study and Traffic Analysis, item number 13.
Thank you and good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. As you recall, in spring of 2023, the City Council directed staff to complete a traffic analysis of Wildwood Canyon Road, of a segment of Wildwood Canyon Road, more specifically near the intersections of Canyon Drive and Oakview Road in the vicinity of the Wildwood City Park and the Wildwood State Park. The direction from City Council came after several residents spoke during public comment, and this was after a fatal traffic accident had occurred in the area. So city staff worked with our traffic engineer to complete that analysis over a 1-year period. The reason it took a year is because we hadn't analyzed the traffic, or at least obtained data from year-round traffic due to due to traffic patterns changing because it's when school's in session or summer, or there's a summer break from schools, or even during the busy apple season, since this is one of the roads used by visitors to the Oak Glen area. While the data was being collected and the analysis was being completed, staff did meet with residents in the area, and including the representatives from the Wildwood Watchers Fire Safe Council to keep them informed of the process. Staff did use some of the information that was obtained from these meetings and discussions with the residents and the Wildwood Watchers Fire Safe Council as part of the traffic analysis. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Associate Engineer Katrina Kunkel to provide some additional information and the results of the analysis, including some options for City Council to consider.
Thank you, Fermin. Honorable Mayor and council members, thank you for letting me speak tonight. I am excited to share with you the findings from the traffic analysis. To clarify, there were actually 3 different analyses that were completed. So the first one is a traffic control warrant analysis completed at Canyon Drive. This is the location of the crosswalk. That's what you see circled on the left-hand side there. We also had our traffic engineer complete an intersection evaluation, looking at the striping and roadway geometry at Oakview Road, and so that's the intersection on the right-hand side. And then we also completed a speed survey along Wildwood Canyon Road between Mesa Grande and Oak Glen Road. So for the first intersection at Canyon Drive, we completed a traffic control warrant analysis. We looked at a traffic signal warrant, a stop sign warrant, and an in-ground crosswalk lighting warrant. And none of these were met for that existing crosswalk intersection. That again is at Wildwood Canyon Road and Canyon Drive where the existing crosswalk is. So to just give a little information, I know I've been using the word warrant a lot, so just to kind of give you an idea of what that is, I'm going to focus here on the stop sign warrant analysis. So a stop sign warrant analysis is a guideline that is from the California Vehicle Code, and it sets criteria that must be met in order for a stop sign or traffic signal or any other traffic control device to be basically legally installed. So for a stop sign, we're looking at 5 or more reported crashes within a 12-month period that are susceptible to being fixed by the installation of a stop sign. So not just any crashes count, it has to be fixable by the installation of that stop sign. In addition to that, at least 300 vehicles per hour for 8 hours enter the intersection. Now, this doesn't have to be consecutive 8 hours, but 8 hours within a 24-hour period. And then the combined vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle volume has to be at 200 per entering the intersection, and that's for the same 8 hours. That's coming from the minor street, so 200 from the minor street, and then that causes a 30-plus second delay. And then finally, the last criterion is the 85th percentile, which is roughly like the average speed, exceeds 40 miles per hour. Now, if all of those criteria are not met, but the first 3 are met with an 80%, that also meets the warrant, and so we could install a stop sign. So as I mentioned previously, none of the warrants were met. All of them have varying criterion, but this just kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at when we say complete a traffic analysis or a traffic warrant analysis. So why do we want to meet warrants? Well, first, they're quantifiable criterion that are set by the California Vehicle Code. So we are obligated to meet these in order to install a traffic control device. And why do they have them? Well, there's really a balance of safety and of level of service. So we want, obviously, our roads to be safe, but we also want them to flow freely or as freely as possible. So just kind of a balance of those two factors. And then maybe most importantly, it really limits the liability for the city. So if we were to install a traffic control device without going through this warrant process and having that on file, having that signed by a traffic engineer and then ratified by our city engineer, the city would be liable for any accident or injury that occurs at a location that we installed something that wasn't warranted. So because none of the traffic control devices were warranted, we did have our traffic engineer give us some other options that we could look at installing. So I have 3 options here that we are looking to install at Canyon Drive. So the first option is to repaint the existing white ladder style crosswalks at the intersection. You can see that they haven't been painted in a while. They're fading a little bit. So reinstalling those just to kind of increase awareness and more visibility to approaching drivers. The second would be to install advanced yield lines and yield here to pedestrian signs, and I'll show you what those look like here in the next slide. And then finally, another option is to install a solar-powered rectangular rapid flashing beacon. That is a mouthful, so we're going to call them RRFBs from now on. And that would be us at the marked crosswalk, and I will show you what those are as well. Maybe. Okay. So these are the first 2 options. You'll see at the top these have no fiscal impact, and that's because staff has decided to integrate these into our existing 23-24 striping program. So we are already out to bid with that program. These items are included in there, so these will be installed with this current fiscal year. So on the left-hand side, you see the existing crosswalks. Those will be restriped. And then on the right-hand side, these are the new pavement markings. It's those triangular yield pavement markings. They bring a lot more visibility to the crosswalk as well, and so those will be installed as part of our annual striping program. Where am I aiming? Okay. Sorry about that. So the third option, this one does have a potential fiscal impact. These are the rapid rectangular flashing beacons. These are pedestrian push button activated. They're really, really bright. I don't know if you remember, we did have these installed at 2nd Street and Oakland Road before the signal went in, and they are really bright. What's nice about them is they are at the crosswalk. We do have advanced warning beacons that exist on Wildwood, but these are located right at the crosswalk, and because they're push button activated, they tell the driver there is a pedestrian in the crosswalk. So they are only going to be lit up when there's activity there at the crosswalk, which is a little bit different than those other beacons that exist. These don't require a warrant to be met, so we are able to install them without that risk of liability. They're solar powered, so there's minimal infrastructure to install these. And then the estimated cost for these is $40,000 to purchase and install, which is why we say there's a potential fiscal impact should council want to pursue these. That would be something that could be integrated into the upcoming budget. So now we will be looking at the analysis at Oakview Road and Wildwood Canyon Road. This was the intersection analysis, looking at the roadway geometry and existing striping. So the traffic engineer did find that the existing geometry of the roadway is adequate, and he had no required recommendations at this time, but he did provide some optional okay, thank you. He did have some options that we could look at installing. You'll notice that, again, there are highlighted items and unhighlighted items. The unhighlighted items, those are signing and striping. Again, staff has determined that we can just integrate those into our 23-24 striping program, so those will be installed. Just a refresh of the existing striping, and then there's some additional signing and striping that I'll show you on the next slide. And then there is a larger project recommendation here with option 7 that I will explain with you as well. So, okay, there we go. So these are the options that will be integrated into our 23-24 striping program. There's some centerline striping along Wildwood Canyon Road. As you approach Oakview Road, there is some additional centerline striping. This gives the illusion of a median, kind of gives a little more delineation, and just kind of helps push cars away from that turn lane more towards the outer lanes. In addition, centerline striping on Oakview Road, again, just kind of delineates traffic and brings a little more awareness to that intersection for entering a stop area. Some additional signage, end of roadway sign. This will be facing Oakview Road, so basically at the end of the striping that you see on the right-hand side. Installation of no parking along the north side of Wildwood Canyon Road. That just allows for a little bit enhanced sight distance as you are turning onto Wildwood Road from Oakview Road, and then a side street ahead sign in advance of Oakview Road along Wildwood Canyon Road to let drivers know, hey, there's this intersection, to be aware of cars turning out since it's uncontrolled. So those are the signing and striping that will be integrated into our program. And then the final recommendation or option that City Council has would be to do a full widening of Wildwood Canyon Road. This exhibit here shows it from Canyon Road, so from that crosswalk to Oakview Road. This would include a widening of paving, and then to do the ultimate condition, that includes curb, gutter, sidewalk, curb ramps, and then trail or sidewalk, depending on what's reflected in the general plan. This includes engineering design, potential right-of-way acquisition, utility coordination. There also appear to be some mature oak trees on the north side, which are at risk for removal should we proceed with this option. The estimated cost for this is approximately $350,000, but again, that's a rough estimate because there's so many components that we're just a little bit unsure of at this time. And then the final study was a speed survey that was completed along Wildwood Canyon Road. This covered the area from Mesa Grande to Oakland Road. The study showed that majority of the traffic is within that 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. So at this time, they're recommending no change and to keep it posted at 45 miles an hour. So in summary, any of the lower cost items, the signing and striping, those have been integrated into our 23-24 pavement management program, so those items will be installed. We're not looking for council action on those, but there are 2 options that we would like some direction from council if we should pursue those with the coming fiscal year. That would be the installation of the RRFB at Canyon Road, which has an estimated cost of approximately $40,000, and then the widening of Wildwood Canyon Road at the intersection of Oakview, and that's an estimated cost of $350,000. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Preciado, anything further on the presentation?
No, in that last slide, we showed the limits of the speed survey that was done, and along with some of the other things that we've done in the area, we have made it a little easier to enforce speeds. If you've driven there lately, you've seen our solar-powered speed feedback sign that if you're going under the speed limit, it'll show your speed. If you're exceeding the speed limit, it'll flash and remind you that the speed limit's 45. So So again, in the meeting with the residents and the group that we met with, we appreciated their input. A lot of it was useful for us to look to see how we could make that segment of Wildwood Canyon Road safer for motor vehicles and pedestrians and the hikers that use that multi-purpose trail crossing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, prior to moving on with any questions for staff, I do have 2 public speaker slips. First one, Miss Kathy Barton. And Miss Denise Work, you'll be following Ms. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. First, I'd like to thank you for authorizing the analysis of these 2 areas along Wildwood Canyon Road. Also want to commend city staff for the care and diligence that they took in leading this and undertaking this study, and also the transparency for keeping us informed throughout the course of the study at each milestone point and answering our myriad questions, of course, since we aren't traffic experts ourselves. As you saw in the staff report, there's in particular 2 areas that are being addressed. I would say I am in support of all of the options that are listed in the staff report, and it is gratifying to see that many of them will have no fiscal impact and can be incorporated in the existing pavement striping program. The 2 fiscal impact items I think are worthy of consideration for next year's fiscal year budget. In particular, the crossing at Canyon Drive gets use by a variety of trail users, pedestrians, hikers, bicycle riders, and even equestrians. I know I've stopped there several occasions for a horse to cross at that area. So I think the RRFB would be a worthy investment there to improve safety for those trail users. And so I'd respectfully ask your consideration of including that in next year's budget. The other item, of course, has a much higher fiscal impact and may take longer to accomplish. But I'd also like your consideration in moving forward with at least studying the feasibility of that project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Work?
Good evening, Denise Work, 37202 Lime Kiln Drive. And thank you, Kathy, where'd she go? For all that she does, and we're part of that little group of the Wildwood Watchers. I hadn't intended to speak on this, but I'm surprised that there was nothing, and I'd like for the traffic analysis to say something about Oak Grove Road, because as traffic comes down from Oak Glen Road, comes down that hill, at the bottom of the hill, there's you cross that little bridge, and Oak Grove Road, it actually runs into Oakview. So they're talking about the mitigation at Oakview, where there already is a turn lane, but there isn't one at Oak Grove. And I've lived there for 31 years, and I can't even tell you how many times I hear the crash, and I've had to go down even in the middle of the night with a flashlight and blankets and, help somebody till 911 arrives. So I don't know what can be done about that. Usually it's somebody who's out of control, a teenager most likely, who loses it when they come down that hill. And there have been quite a few accidents there. There was a fatality a couple of years ago at the same intersection, but that was the drunk driver who was terrorizing the city that day, I think. But he hit, I think it was a water truck, kind of head on, and and his body laid in the middle of Oak Grove Road for hours and hours and hours. So anyway, I just want to know if there was anything done on that analysis for Oak Grove, if there could be a turn lane. I'm always I turn my blinker on way in advance and get way over to the scrunch to the center line so that somebody can go around you and keep going up the hill. And I know a few of you are well aware of that area as well. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. moving on to questions, I do have a few questions, just and mostly for clarification purposes. Mr. Preciado, great report. Thank you for the warrant analysis. My first statement is actually more of a comment than a question. We're kind of in a preview at one of the next walk with the mayors about what it takes to modify our roadways. It's not as simple as, you know, a post hole digger and a bag of Quickcrete and the stop sign, just go and throw a stop sign in. There's a lot that goes into this, and as indicated by staff, the vehicle code kind of dictates what we do as a municipality and relating to traffic control devices and traffic signals and stop signs and speed bumps and all of that. That's accurate, right? That's by law, that we didn't come up with those 300 vehicles in an 8-hour period and this many crashes. That wasn't something that was dreamt up within the halls of our city hall?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's codified in the vehicle code, and then she mentioned specifically, you know, some liability. So, Mr. City Attorney, my question, and sorry to put you on the spot here, if we opt to just ignore the vehicle code and say, you know what, this is our city, local control exists, we want to have a stop sign there, by God, tell me about what kind of, tell me about this liability. What kind of penalties could we face, or is that just a big bad wolf scare tactic from the state?
So essentially what we're looking at is a dangerous condition on public property issue at that point. When we go through the warrant process, when we have traffic engineers and the city engineer reviewing it and approving it, and ultimately either this body approving it or standards adopted by this body being used to approve it, the city has a certain level, it's not absolute, but a certain level of defense when you have the inevitable traffic collisions that occur daily on roads of a city this size. It's called design immunity, is generally what it's referenced. So it's why the city wants to follow standards. It's generally accepted that stop signs all looking the same throughout the entire state and the country, traffic signals, markings, you know, having uniformity across the entire state and ultimately across the entire country is beneficial because people don't stay only in their city when they're traveling. And if the stop signs all looked different, if they were all in different places depending on which jurisdiction you would go to, it would make the traveling public less safe. So when we're talking about stop signs, ultimately what it comes down to is people want individuals to stop. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating what the engineering staff has already gone over, but when you put a stop sign in a location where it doesn't meet warrants, what research has borne out is that it doesn't actually get people to stop. I know every person on this dais and every person down here and every person in the crowd comes to a full and complete stop at every single stop sign that they encounter as they drive around town. But when you put a stop sign in a location where it doesn't meet warrants, people do what is sometimes called a California stop, or even worse, they just drive through it because instinctually they know that it doesn't make sense for that stop sign to be there. And so when you have a stop sign that people begin to ignore or simply not follow completely, that is actually more dangerous than having no stop sign at all. So we've had a similar conversation with speed bumps in the past. Ultimately, it comes down to any traffic control measure. You know, I defer a significant amount to the engineers because it's their profession that's required to study this, borne out by traffic enforcement from our law enforcement partners. But ultimately, what you're looking at from a liability perspective is that if you put in a stop sign that doesn't meet warrants, and we have a traffic injury collision at that location, it would be very difficult, not impossible, I don't want to say it's a slam dunk, but it would be very difficult for the city to defend a dangerous condition on public property case that's brought against it. And ultimately, if the city got in the habit of doing things like that, we may find ourselves uninsurable from a negligence, from a liability perspective. We get our insurance through what are called joint powers insurance authorities. So that's many public agencies all banding together to spread the risk around to many, many different agencies. If the city decides that it's going to stop following the generally accepted rules of the road, as it were, we may find ourselves in a position where not only are we making it easier for the city to be sued, but where the city lacks insurance coverage in cases of significant exposure.
And then just I don't want to go into any type of closed session things, but I know in the last 3.5 years I've been on the council, several times we have seen closed session items come before council relative to liability of some kind of a claim related to a traffic collision, and they ask for our warrant analysis of any given roadway. So is that accurate in your experience as a city attorney through different municipalities? This is not something that it is commonplace to ask for the city's warrant analysis on different traffic control devices?
So, absolutely. So when we're looking at lawsuits involving traffic collisions and liability, it is not uncommon for requests to come in. They want to see the signal timing. When was the last time the signal timing was done? Was it done appropriately? Was the timing actually up to date? Was it working? They look at the striping. Was the striping done according to California standards? Sometimes it wasn't. I've litigated case after case after case in this area where, you have drivers who aren't following the vehicle code. They're failing to yield to oncoming traffic. I think that, not to get into closed session, that's something that I think the council's familiar with in this city, but in other cities. And still, the city is seen as this deep pocket because a lot of drivers carry insurance minimums and the damage resulting from some of these collisions is high. The city's seen as a deep pocket, and so they will try to find anything wrong with how we have engineered, designed, constructed that road in an attempt to come after the city. And again, if this council said, we're going to put a stop sign here, gosh darn it, and in our judgment, it is warranted, I would absolutely work with engineering. We would do everything we can to bring forward a defensible package. But you need to know that if you stray from the accepted standards that the state has outlined, you are putting us at a greater risk in those circumstances.
So, and forgive my theatrics for those who are listening in the audience and also at home. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that this is something that is a science, more or less, that we have to follow. I get the emails and phone calls all the time begging for different things: stop lights, stop signs, speed bumps. And it's frustrating. I see it myself. We want something done immediately by our government, and unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but the facts are that a warrant analysis must be conducted to determine what is being done. I know in law enforcement we talk about the ease of traffic safety, that there's 3 of them. There's engineering, which our city engineers are responsible for, with striping, lighting, these warrant analysis. So engineering, enforcement, our heroes over there in tan and green are out there doing their job to enforce the laws, and education, which is part of what we're going to be talking about with the walk with the mayor, with pushing out social media as this moves forward, of why we're doing it, explaining the why of why we're even talking about a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. That's part of the education that has to go in as well. So be on the lookout for that. We're going to be educating the public from our city PIO standpoint, really leaning on the police department's PIO to push out the enforcement aspect of it, and as Ms. Barton said, our city staff doing a commendable work, really pushing forward the engineering aspect of it. So sorry for going long-winded on that one, but I felt it prudent and we talked about it. Any other questions or comments?
I have a comment. So you covered everything that concerns or questions that I was going to bring up. I want to thank Fermin and staff for addressing this issue and meeting with the people the constituents up in that neighborhood, because this has been something that I've received phone calls and emails on for a little bit. Just because it doesn't meet analysis now or warrants now doesn't mean that this isn't something that couldn't be revisited down the road, and maybe those numbers are different, correct?
That is correct. We can revisit it when the numbers, the volume changes, or even the patterns change, yes.
So a prime example of that, I believe, would be the stop sign that got installed at Wildwood and Colorado. For a long time, people had been asking for a stop sign there, but it wasn't until this last year, I want to say, all these years were starting to run together, this last year that it finally met warrants and we're able to put a stop sign there to help at that blind corner. So while I would like to see that we were able to do more, we have certain lines we have to color within, and I'm happy to see that there are some things that we could address, and I'd like to see us address them, so that would be my motion, that we address the items that they've recommended we do those. But if we have accidents and that area, we need to make sure they get reported so that there are numbers, so that when it gets revisited in a year or 2 years from now, that maybe those warrants can be met and additional things could be considered at that time.
Real quick, as I go back, I want to talk about the second item, the $350,000 item, when she said right-of-way acquisition. We're not talking about city easement, correct? Or is that a city easement, or we're talking about taking people's property for that widening?
As she mentioned, we still haven't looked at that completely, but if the widening and making the turn pocket longer, it may require that right-of-way acquisition, so we would have to go through that process to acquire some right-of-way from the neighboring private property owners. We would purchase a permanent easement to build the public improvements.
And so that's a consensual process initially.
Sure.
It gets appraised, it gets evaluated, we take the minimum necessary to do what needs to be done.
Sure.
Any, bad word, eminent domain, any action on that regard requires the direction of the city council, so.
What does that do, though? I mean, from the one street to the other, I think it's from Canyon to Oakview, widening that street, what does that do to safety as far as, does that mean that you have lanes to pull over to turn in? What does that do exactly?
It would primarily do two things. One is that it would improve sight distance from both intersections, and then it would make the turn pocket to turn left onto Oakview longer.
So the eastbound to northbound turn onto Oakview from Wildwood Canyon?
Yes.
So is the problem that right now with the turn lane at Oakview, there's not enough stacking ability? It makes it longer, but is there really that much traffic turning on there that causes a safety hazard?
I wouldn't call it a problem, but when that intersection was designed, it was designed based on the standards at that time, which didn't require a longer left turn pocket. And at the time, the posted speed limit may have been different, but for a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit, the standard, if we were to build that new intersection today, would have to be a lot longer than what it is now.
So is there a reason, Denise made a good point. I mean, I've driven down from Oakland Road, down that hill right there, and that one street that you kind of encounter as you hit the bottom of the hill. Is there a reason why that wasn't included in the analysis?
It wasn't included because the direction we received was to look at Oakview and Canyon Drive specifically, but we did look at the entire segment of Wildwood Canyon Road. And in fact, we reviewed that internally, and we did a few things to improve sight distance there. We moved some signage, and there was an oak tree that needed to be trimmed, which we took care of. And so it was evaluated. We were able to address some of the minor issues that we saw, but it wasn't a full analysis again. And based on my opinion is that if the intersection of Oakview did not meet those warrants, the traffic on Limekiln is less than that, so obviously we could do the warrant analysis, but based on the numbers that we collected last year, it probably would not have met warrants for a signal, a stop sign, or any other traffic control device.
What about widening? Are we calling that same as the traffic control device, widening for a turn pocket there? Is that same concept for that warrant analysis?
No, that would not require warrant analysis. That's more of a design. We could certainly look at that. I know that there is the cost there would be less because there isn't already a curb gutter and utilities, and there are some oak trees. One of the things that was mentioned is that option to widen at Canyon Drive and Oakview Road would require the removal of about 7 mature oak trees. Yeah.
Sure.
That's a problem.
So, if I understood correctly, as part of our 23-24 PMP that we're talking about the striping?
Yes.
So that we anticipate that'll be done by mid-year?
It would.
Or by new fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I definitely make a motion that we do the solar-powered, what was the terminology? I forget here. The
Something, something.
rectangular rapid flashing beacon at Canyon, I think that absolutely needs to be done.
Is that the RRFB you're talking about?
Yeah,
How much are, you said $40,000 for one or 40,000 for two?
For two, one for each side, yeah.
So 40,000 for two? Okay.
So
I make a motion that we do that for sure.
can we do this? And then I think Councilman Duncan initially mentioned it. Can we approve this item? I'll second. Did you second?
No, I didn't second.
All right. I'll second Councilman Duncan's motion for the rectangular rapid flash beacon to be installed.
So I have a quick question. I had originally made a motion for both, so is that like dead? And we're just
Oh, I
gonna
didn't
go with that
hear
one?
you make that motion. All right. All right, so we'll take it one at a time. So there's a motion on the table for the $390,000 option of roadway widening improvements and the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Is there a second for that motion?
No, I'll retract my motion. I don't want to spend 350. I'm not sure.
No, his motion was for the entirety.
Oh, I see.
All right, so is there a second for Councilman Thorpe's motion for the $390,000 option? All right, that motion will die. Councilman Duncan made a motion for the $40,000 rectangular rapid flashing beacon to be installed. I will second his motion. Is there any further discussion on that? Okay, is there, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries 5-0. Councilman Duncan it wasn't a motion, but it sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, would it be possible to agendize another item soon so we can discuss potential striping for a turn bay at Oak Grove? Is that something we can bring back? Since we're doing striping in that area anyways, and if it's possible to do it let's bring it back and let us know what the fiscal impact would be to examine that and to maybe see that come to fruition. Can we do that? Good?
Yes.
You agree with that, Councilman Duncan? All right. We have two of us. All right. Yeah, thank you for that. That was a good presentation, and I think it was altogether needed. So we'll move on to item number 14. This is from our city attorney, Mr. Stephen Graham, introduction and first reading of ordinance number 444 regarding sidewalk vendors and the regulation of food trucks.
Thank you, Mayor. This is our continuing effort to keep the city's municipal code up to date with changes in state law to ensure that we can effectively enforce the provisions of our ordinances. These are two updates. One is to the street vending regulations of our municipal code, and the second is to food truck operations. We tend to group these two together because there are some similarities in issues, although we usually have two separate chapters because there are, of course, differences. The primary motivators for this update are SB 946 and SB 972. So SB 946 was passed a few years ago and is essentially an attempt at decriminalization by the state legislature of street vendors. This was in response to significant enforcement efforts in cities like Los Angeles that were attempting to regulate the very prolific street vendor situation that they had in that city and other cities. Cities were bringing forward municipal criminal citations, including misdemeanor citations, against sidewalk vendors. I myself have prosecuted those in the long ago past. The legislature decided that a more appropriate way of enforcing local regulations on sidewalk vendors is to have administrative enforcement only. So these are the typical tickets and fines. Cities, in response to that, having very significant concerns about health and safety when it related to food items being prepared. Typically, carts do not have the necessary facilities under the retail food code, to ensure adequate temperature control over perishable items, adequate sanitation for staff who are working the cart. Again, that's another thing that I spent some time enforcing in the distant past. We found meat that was not being temperature controlled at all. We found extremely unhygienic hand washing if there was any, it was extremely unhygienic. We found cooking surfaces that hadn't been cleaned in months, if not years. And so it was a very legitimate health and safety concern. And so cities amended their sidewalk vendor ordinances to decriminalize the vast majority of sidewalk vending activities while still having administrative enforcement, but continuing to criminalize violations of state law and obtaining a county health permit for the sale of food. The legislature deciding in their wisdom that those health and safety concerns did not warrant criminal prosecution for those food issues, enacted SB 972, which further decriminalized violations of the Retail Food Code. So back to square one, administrative enforcement is the primary method of enforcing these local regulations. Nevertheless, you will see the ordinance that we've adopted or recommended the council adopt contains a impoundment provision. So generally speaking, you can look through the list of activities, but in attempting to enforce the provisions of this code, obviously administrative citations are limiting unto themselves, but even attempting administrative citation is often difficult. It's not unusual to have vendors, maybe they have a bucket with some flowers and they're attempting to sell those. Maybe they have limited merchandise. To have a city enforcement official come up to them, they abandon it on the sidewalk and leave, or they simply refuse to identify themselves. As the law enforcement officials on the dais know, the ability for a non-peace officer to ask for your identification when you have not committed a crime, because remember, this has been decriminalized, we're talking about an administrative violation, is extremely limited. Used to be, if there was a crime, there was suspicion that a crime had been committed, a peace officer could request identification. But now, because it's administrative and because we're typically having code enforcement going out there, what you'll find is that people refuse to identify themselves as a way to attempt to evade the administrative citation process. So this is a constant game, unfortunately, of cat and mouse. A lot of these individuals who are out there actually engaging in the sidewalk vending tend to be individuals who are not, I would say, the sort of hub of the activity. Sometimes they are temporary hires. Sometimes they're actually trafficked individuals. They get picked up in a van. They get dropped off throughout the county. They're told, this is your spot to vend. Don't give the police your name. Don't give them your ID. If they approach you, leave. And let's say you did have the power to arrest them. You could arrest them and someone's going to be there the very next day. So how do you effectively enforce that? You look to our new impoundment procedures. If we're talking about cooking materials, we seize the cooking apparatus. The grills, the coolers, the other storage devices. If there's perishable food, we don't have the ability to store that long term, it's disposed of. If you're talking about merchandise that is abandoned because someone sees code enforcement coming and they leave, city can seize that, and depending on whether it's perishable or not, dispose of it or hold it for an appeal hearing or attempt to return it to the owner, including anyone who fails to identify themselves. So that is the best enforcement mechanism that we have available to us at this time, and that's what we're updating the code to include. Moving on to food trucks. Food trucks have a good history right now in the city. So working with staff had a lot of very good feedback to make this ordinance Yucaipa specific and to address the needs of this community. We know that there are several popular food trucks that operate in the community. The goal of this is not to disrupt ongoing operations, but to have clear, enforceable regulations should we have a disruptive force come forward in the future. With that, I will give it back to you, Mayor. If there's any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. Questions for our staff?
No.
Now, the revenue that comes in with the food trucks to the city, they pay a fee? How does that work?
So-
Any
so-
food truck can come in and sell, and we don't reap the benefit? Not that I'm greedy on it, but we need the money.
So there is a recovery of fees for the itinerant vendor permit. The city council has already set a fee for that. So there is a recovery for the cost of processing the permits, but is this a sort of revenue generating? Do you have to pay the city, a certain amount of your revenue in order to operate here? No, they are subject to the same tax laws as everybody else, though. Sales tax.
I got a question. On the permits, are you able to get a permit for the whole year, or is the permit daily?
Are you talking about for the food trucks?
Yes, food
sidewalk-
trucks.
Yes, so I think it is actually an annual permit.
You know how much that is?
Not off the top of my head, but it's an existing permit that already exists and the fee's already been set.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff?
I do, yeah.
Sir?
So, does this really matter if we have this or not? Does SB 946 and SB 972 just basically say they can do what they want? Does this have any teeth? Can we actually do anything? I mean, typically, you see a taco stand set up over on Calamasa Boulevard near County Line Road, or you see it down here at 14th Street. And is there anything you can do about that? Because clearly, they don't have a permit, a health permit, they don't have a city license, and we're not working on Sunday. Our code enforcement work on Sunday, and they know that. So they set up and they operate during the week, and then they shut down Sunday night and go home, and then, come back on the weekend. Just like bootleg signs in the real estate business. People that don't have a permit, they put them out on Friday night, take them down Sunday night, and they're gone. But does this really matter if we actually approve this or not?
I can touch on that briefly. Yeah, I think it does, and these provisions have been effective in other jurisdictions. We've seen what has happened. It started in LA, now it's moving this way. Recently in the city of Fontana, they've dealt with this in a big way. So this is an attempt to get ahead of that before it balloons to that big of an issue here. We've had an issue here, not to that level yet. But just a few weeks ago, actually, even without these ordinances in place, there was an issue on County Line Road in the city of Yucaipa. Actually, a member of this council called expressing concern, and it was after hours. But I contacted our public safety manager, who initially was going to have code enforcement respond after hours, but we ended up having a number of deputies working a special project not far from there. So those deputies responded, and it turns out that this particular vendor was set up on city property. And so it was a very simple conversation, and they willingly left on their own. And I don't believe they've been back. So it is something that we intend to be vigilant and rather aggressive with, and based on the same or similar provisions of ordinances in other jurisdictions, I do believe they're effective.
Does this proposed ordinance specify a street vendor, let's say a taco stand? We obviously are going to require a city license and a health permit, but does it also specify where they can be and can't be? Okay.
It does. So there are numerous locational restrictions that all have a nexus to public health and safety that are located in the ordinance. So when we're talking about the sidewalk vendor ordinance, I'm scrolling, prohibit activities and locations. So starting on page 236 of your packet, they're prohibited from being on unpaved locations. They're prohibited from being on private property without the lawful consent of the private property owner, and on and on and on. So we've gone through, we have the authority under 946 to implement reasonable time, place, manner restrictions that have a nexus to public health and safety. We've gone through there and done that. And so, to your original question, which was, what's the point? I think, if I'm paraphrasing correctly.
Right.
The point is to have an enforceable ordinance that is up to current standards in compliance with state law, so that when we do have an issue with vendors who are not complying with our ordinance, that we actually have the ability to enforce it in a lawful manner. You know, in terms of, you know, people learning the code enforcement officer's schedule and things like that, I mean, that's fundamentally a personnel issue where, you know, the city manager can reassign people's shifts as appropriate to do enforcement. But if we don't have this on the books, there's really no point.
Right. So with the food trucks, though, like right now, Yucaipa doesn't have a kitchen, so they have a food truck. What's the one at Fifth Street?
Hops and Spokes.
Hops and Spokes doesn't have a kitchen. So does this basically give them a permit to be there, and then does it limit the number of food trucks that could be in Yucaipa at any given time?
So
I didn't catch that.
there's no maximum number of food trucks that can operate in the city of Yucaipa. You know, in terms of the Yucaipa food truck, my understanding is that they are actually operating on city property with the permission of the city. So that's an exception under 513080. As are when we have events and festivals, when we have food trucks coming to those, those are an exception to the permitting requirement. So like I said, we looked at the existing way Yucaipa operates now, and this, again, I give full credit to staff for this because they brought these issues to our office's attention as we were drafting the ordinance. We wanted to make sure that we crafted something that would not disrupt good operators that we have in town that are operating in a manner that isn't causing a public nuisance.
I move approval.
Real quick before we move on to the vote.
I had a question when you're done.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So does that mean that they can't park those trucks out in front on the street in the parking spot?
So they can for a limited period of time. So I believe I originally had this here for an hour, although the time may have been increased slightly. But there is a limited amount of time that a food truck can park in the public right of way and operate. They can't permanently camp there.
What's the time? Because sometimes they sit there for 4 to 6 hours.
Understood. Give me 1 second. It was originally, I had it at an hour. I think we may have increased it to 3. Give me 1 second to look it up. Any other questions while I'm stalling?
I have a comment, not a question.
Yeah, so under 513090G, 3 hours in any 24-hour period is the maximum amount of time that you can be parked on the public right-of-way in conducting food truck.
Are we able to move that up to maybe 6 hours?
You can if you'd like. It's your ordinance.
So we have a motion on the table by Councilman Duncan. Would you like to amend your motion to include an increase of time to 6 hours?
Yes.
Yes? All right. Before we move on to a vote, firstly, I know that our new code enforcement officer that was hired as a result of our homeless strategic plan, our solutions-oriented policing team, that she's a rock star. And I know I've heard it, we've seen it in reports during our public safety committee meetings. I don't think she has a set schedule. She's here all hours of the day and night. So I know for a fact some of our code enforcement, they are problem-oriented enforcement, and they show up when they need to. Moreover, our police officer, our deputy sheriffs, are commissioned under California Penal Code Section 830.1, all weather, all roads, all codes. There's not a law in the state they can't enforce, to include our municipal code. Those are our Yucaipa police officers, and they are here 24/7. They can enforce the Yucaipa Municipal Code. They've been trained on it. They have the site books for it. So for any would-be municipal code violators out there who think they can operate with impunity between or after normal business hours, you are mistaken. The gentleman in Tanna Green, or ladies and gentlemen in Tanna Green, will show up, and they are very well versed on our municipal code. So fret not, good taxpayers of Yucaipa. The police department is here to enforce our municipal code, not just the state law. So the amended motion was to increase the amount of time to 6 hours. Will that require you to come back? No? Okay, we can move forward with the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilman Garner. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. All right, our final agendized discussion item. This is by our city attorney, the adoption of a response to the 2023 civil grand jury final report, and I do have one speaker slip.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Actually, I'm going to present this item. Thank you. So the 2023 San Bernardino County Civil Grand Jury final report contains findings and recommendations pertaining to multiple public agencies and programs, including San Bernardino County Children and Family Services, Redlands Animal Shelter, City of San Bernardino Department of Animal Services, Omnitrans, Trona Joint Unified School District, San Bernardino County and City Jails, and the Yucaipa City Council. California Penal Code Section 933C requires that the City Council to formally adopt and file with the presiding judge of the Superior Court a response to the findings and recommendations contained in the grand jury's final report on matters under the council's purview no later than 90 days after the final report is submitted.
Mr. Mann, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, sir.
Did I misspeak? Did I introduce Mr. Graham?
Yes.
I apologize. It is Mr. Mann that was agendized to speak on this matter. I think there was some confusion. I apologize. Mr. City Manager, continue. I apologize for interrupting.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you, sir. So the civil grand jury submitted its final report on December 15th, 2023, which gives the council through March 14th, which is later this week, to adopt and file its response. One thing I'd like to point out here is that since in this case the investigation was of the city council itself, this response is very much the city council's response. So what we're bringing to you tonight is a draft response. It's important that you are comfortable with it, as again, it is technically your response to the grand jury.
Real quick, just for the edification of the record, this is not the first time that members of the city council have seen this response. We were presented this earlier, or last week. We've read through it. I know for certain it was an email to all of us, so I just wanted to clarify, this is not the first time we're seeing this.
Correct.
Sir.
Thank you. So first of all, I think it's important to understand what a civil grand jury is. And this is taken from the website of the Judicial Council of California. It reads, every year in each of California's 58 counties, a group of ordinary citizens takes an oath to serve as grand jurors. Its function is to investigate the operations of the various officers, departments, and agencies of local government. Each civil grand jury determines which officers, departments, and agencies it will investigate during its term of office. Civil grand juries are convened on an annual basis by the Superior Court to carry out three functions: investigating and reporting on the functioning of local government, including counties, cities, and special districts; hearing evidence and determining whether there is sufficient cause to indict individuals suspected of crimes; and investigating allegations of a public official's corrupt or willful misconduct in office, and when warranted, filing an accusation against that official to remove them from office. It's important to note that civil grand juries are not the same as criminal grand juries. In San Bernardino County, criminal indictments are handled by a separate criminal grand jury, whose members are randomly selected from the trial jury pool to decide whether to press criminal charges. So what we're dealing with here today is a report from the civil grand jury. Who serves on a civil grand jury? Average civic-minded citizens. The idea is that this will be, grand juries they're of the people. They are the people, not necessarily individuals who come from government background or legal background, but regular citizens. If you want to serve on a civil grand jury, you can submit an application. The jurors are appointed by the Superior Court and serve one-year terms. No particular training, background, or experience is required. And here's a picture of the 2023 civil grand jury. Okay, so kind of the key element of the grand jury report for each jurisdiction it investigates are a list of findings and corresponding recommendations. So we're going to go through now each of the findings and recommendations of the civil grand jury in relation to the city of Yucaipa. Some of these are very summarized, and in other cases, I'm going to read directly from the document because I believe some information is very important for everyone to hear. So finding number one, Yucaipa City Council members, let me also say that for every finding, the Penal Code requires the city to indicate whether we agree or disagree with that finding. And then for every response, for every recommendation, to indicate whether we intend to implement that recommendation or not. Now again, these are recommendations. There is no legal obligation to implement any of these, but they are civil grand jury's recommendation. So we have to indicate whether we agree with the finding, and for each recommendation, whether we intend to implement it, and if so, when. So finding number one, Yucaipa City Council members begin and continue their terms of service with little understanding of Yucaipa's Conflict of Interest Code, Yucaipa's Code of Conduct, and best practices of city government, as well as the California state statutes and regulations related to the open and transparent operation of city government. So our proposed response here is the City Council, because again, this is your response, the City Council agrees with this finding. Despite finding that no city official violated any law or regulation, the civil grand jury believes the City Council could benefit from additional training. The City Council does not disagree. In fact, the new city manager identified this as an issue in early 2023 prior to the civil grand jury investigation. As a result, the new city attorney provided an in-person ethics training, which covered the Brown Act, Public Records Act, Political Reform Act, etc., that was open to the public, all city staff, elected and appointed officials. In addition, the City Council is now attending conferences and trainings that will better expose them to best practices. As an example, 2 members of the City Council attended the Mayor's and Council Members Academy put on by the League of California Cities in January of this year, which covered the legal, financial, and practical fundamentals of serving as an elected official in California. For one council member, this was the first time in his 11 years of serving on the council that the city facilitated his attendance at such a conference. In the coming months, the City Council is planning to initiate a series of comprehensive trainings for themselves and the public, most of which had not been offered by the previous administration. Recommendation 1A. So in some of the findings, there are multiple recommendations. For finding 1, there are multiple recommendations. So recommendation 1A, the civil grand jury recommends the City of Yucaipa is to provide comprehensive in-person training for each City Council member covering all aspects of the Yucaipa Conflict of Interest Code and Yucaipa Code of Conduct Policy. This training to be completed completely in person with council member interaction. Our response, this recommendation will be implemented in calendar year 2024 as part of a broader training program already under development by city administration. Recommendation 1B. This training is to be in addition to and to supplement already required government training, which currently can be completed online. Response, agreed. Recommendation 1C. City Council members to complete this training within 1 year of formally being installed as City Council members. Our response, this recommendation will be implemented in calendar year 2025 as part of a new council member orientation program already under development by the City Clerk's office. In addition, some of these concepts will likely be presented as part of a candidate briefing program currently under development by the City Clerk's office, which will first be offered to City Council candidates in September of this year. Recommendation 1D, after the initial training, the City of Yucaipa to require in-person interactive training once each subsequent 2-year period, and we say agreed. Recommendation 1E, the City of Yucaipa to document this training by recording the name of the member attending, the name of the trainer, the date of the training, and the topics covered by the training. Agreed. Recommendation 1F, the training to involve not only lecture or online format, but to include interactive real-life examples and situations with active participation by the council members. Agreed. Now we move on to the second finding, which is the Yucaipa City Council does not ensure that the council policies are current and updated every 2 years. Response, the City Council agrees with this finding. The city will implement a review and update schedule to coincide with the biannual training discussed in R1D. The Code of Conduct was adopted in 2019 and has not been updated since. Another striking example is the city's Code of Ethics and Core Values, which was originally adopted in 2011 and has never been updated. Recommendation 2, the grand jury recommends that the Yucaipa City Council display on the city's website the following: Code of Conduct policy updated every 2 years, and Conflict of Interest policy updated and a link to the state guidelines. This recommendation is currently and will be implemented prior to August 1 of this year. In relation to the Code of Conduct, this has been on the city's website under the FPPC filings and ethics training page. The City Council agrees to direct the city manager or his designee to review this policy every 2 years at the time trainings are conducted in order to ensure that it remains current. Should such a review reveal the need for updates, revisions will be proposed to the City Council for adoption. City Council agrees that the current conflict of interest policy should be placed on the city's website and will direct the city manager to do so. Finding 3. The Yucaipa City Council currently has no watchdog commission to oversee the compliance with the Code of Conduct and conflict of interest policies. The oversight group is needed for documenting that the City Council follow the above policies as well as best practices for transparent government. This is an interesting one. This is not something that we commonly see. The City Council disagrees wholly with this finding.
Control yourself, madam.
Recommendation 3.
I shouldn't be able to hear you from the dais.
Recommendation 3. The grand jury recommends the City of Yucaipa to set up an independent watchdog commission to oversee the Yucaipa City Council operations. It would be inappropriate, in our view, for the duly elected members of the City Council to relinquish powers and authority entrusted to them by the voters to an unelected bureaucratic commission. It is not the intent of the voters of Yucaipa, when electing individuals to represent them in local government, that their duly elected officials will then yield to the oversight and potential scrutiny of an unelected commission. Even if so inclined, there would be no practical way to implement this recommendation. If appointed by the council, how could such a commission be considered truly independent from its appointing authority? If not the city council, then who would make the appointment? Who decides who makes the appointment? Organizations that keep an eye on local government in Yucaipa and are actually independent already exist. A prime example is the San Bernardino County Civil Grand Jury. Another is the Fair Political Practices Commission. Others include the Civil Review Board and various taxpayer associations that operate in the region. This is in addition to various interest groups in the community, industry associations, the Yucaipa City Employees Association, nonprofits, the local newspaper, various social media accounts focused on local government in Yucaipa, and others who watch closely the actions of City Council and sound the alarm when they feel the council is acting inappropriately. Likely for reasons similar to those I just stated, it is not common practice in municipal government for the elected body to establish an independent watchdog commission to oversee the council, as suggested by the Civil Grand Jury. In fact, we are not aware of any city in San Bernardino County that operates in this manner. The quote you see on the screen was taken from a San Bernardino Sun article, and it refers to the free press as a better solution to increasing government transparency and accountability than establishing a watchdog commission. The quote is, "Government healing itself with large doses of more government is certainly an option, but there's another force at work in our wonderful American democracy, and it is separate from government, and yet it strives mightily to support and promote better government." So do we support and actively seek transparency and accountability in local government? Yes, we do. However, we believe this is best accomplished when the watchdogs are independent of and separate from the government entity that is being watched. Finding 4. Yucaipa City Council's failure to publicly announce openings for the city manager and city attorney, as well as other controversial votes/decisions, has created in the public an appearance of lack of transparency. Response: the City Council disagrees wholly with this finding. Recommendation: the grand jury recommends that the City Council publicly give notice of future executive level openings and votes/issues. Allow sufficient time for community input before appointing executive positions and voting on impactful issues. I'm going to read directly from the report here. It's a little lengthy, but I think this is important information. The grand jury began this investigation after receiving a complaint about potential violations of the Brown Act. Presumably, this relates to the closed session discussion and appointment of the city manager and concurrent appointment of the city attorney. The report concludes that no violations occurred. This is because closed session is specifically authorized by Government Code Section 54957 for personnel matters. In a California Appeals Court case in 2007, Morrow versus Los Angeles Unified School District, quote, "The purpose of the personnel exemptions are 1, to protect employees from public embarrassment, and 2, to permit free and candid discussions on personnel matters by a local government body. This is a significant issue and is addressed at length in the document titled Recruiting Guidelines for Selecting a Local Government Administrator, a publication from the International City County Management Association, or ICMA, which is the professional organization for local government administrators worldwide. Confidentiality is an important consideration in any executive level recruitment. Present job security and long-term career opportunities could be jeopardized if an applicant's interest in another position is made public prematurely. While applicants realize that the local government will want to contact their current employers to conduct background checks and assess their job performance, they typically prefer to wait until after a finalist has been chosen and a conditional offer has been extended and accepted. From a recruiting standpoint, assurance of confidentiality will result in more applications being submitted, particularly from those who are currently employed elsewhere. As confidentiality is important to both parties, such assurances should be honored. An applicant should be given adequate time to notify their current employers before those employers are contacted by the recruiting local government. So not only did the City Council act in conformity with the law, they acted in conformity with customary practice of other similar agencies. Included in the city's response to the civil grand jury are links to several newspaper articles from other cities in the region that appointed city managers and accepted city manager resignations recently without community input. They include San Bernardino, Rialto, Hesperia, Upland, Pomona, Menifee, and the county itself, County of San Bernardino, in selecting its new CEO. It is not enough for the grand jury to have read letters to the editor in the Yucaipa Cal Mesa News Mirror, as they indicated. Had the grand jury researched the law and customary practice for the appointment of municipal executives, they would have found that confidentiality in the process is not only legal, but also critical to a successful transition. If the grand jury would like to see what happens when a candidate's name is leaked, they need only to look out the window in the city of San Bernardino. When Steve Kerrigan's name was leaked after being interviewed for city manager in San Bernardino in September of last year, he withdrew his name, but the damage was already done. He was fired from his position at his then current city a few days later. In relation to votes on project applications and other issues, the city has always provided proper notice and given ample opportunity for public input. The grand jury's comments on this topic are related to the development application process for the Serrano Estates project. Once again, the grand jury found no violation. The grand jury writes, quote, "The procedure complied with the law regarding the consideration or approval of the Serrano Estates project. However, the rule of law is only half the City Council's mandate for governing. The voice of the people is the other and perhaps paramount," end quote. Setting aside that the grand jury report contains material misstatements regarding the actions of the City Council pertaining to this project, the City Council agrees that public input is important. In fact, the city's actions have demonstrated a commitment to seeking and considering such input. Over the past year, the city has actively sought public involvement and feedback on a range of land use and other issues. The mayor held a meeting and the city manager held 2 meetings with the very individuals or the group that filed the complaints which triggered this grand jury investigation. Larger community meetings were held by city staff on issues such as the Serrano Estates property, the proposed wine country specific plan, where there were 3 community meetings, bear safety event, etc. These meetings were all in addition to the city's requirements under the Brown Act, such as public comment during city council meetings. However, the city council must consider much more than public sentiment when making decisions that impact private property rights and the community at large. Property owners have due process rights to fair and impartial hearings. As such, there are constitutional considerations for city council acting in a quasi-judicial capacity on land use applications. The city council, when acting on a land use application, acts more as a judge than as a legislative body. The city council is required to follow its established process for quasi-judicial hearings to protect the due process rights of the project applicant and others. It would be as inappropriate for the city council to be swayed by public outcry or the voice of the people as it would be for a judge to do the same. Even on legislative issues, our system of government is based on representative democracy, not direct democracy. Elected officials at all levels of government, in cities, counties, state legislatures, and in Congress, understand that while public input is an important consideration, they are tasked with making informed decisions based on an analysis of all the facts, and ultimately on what they believe is the right decision for the communities they serve. They also understand that views expressed by vocal individuals or groups in the community are not always representative of the sentiment of the community at large. Finding 5. Yucaipa City Council has an inadequate compliance process by which the community can offer feedback to the City Council and receive prompt answers. Currently, citizens can contact City Council members directly through telephone calls, emails, and speaking at public meetings. This is inadequate since Yucaipa City Council members are part-time and most have full-time jobs. Therefore, they would not always be available for phone calls and office visits. The City Council agrees in part and disagrees in part with this finding. The recommendation here is that the Yucaipa City Council devise a formal written complaint procedure on the website also, whereby the public can give feedback, ask questions, and voice concerns, with answers returned promptly. The response: the City Council agrees with this recommendation and will direct the City Manager to implement the same prior to October 1st of this year. However, the City Council also notes that the city currently provides numerous and sufficient means by which residents may reach out to their elected officials to give feedback, ask questions, or voice concerns. Some of those means are right here. We also note that the city does not usually receive complaints from residents that they have been unable to contact their representatives on the City Council. Finding 6. Yucaipa City Council implements no procedural audit done annually by an outside independent agency. The City Council agrees with this finding. Recommendation 6. The grand jury recommends that the Yucaipa City Council have a procedural audit every other year by a qualified independent third-party agency. Results of the procedural audit to be reported every other year at City Council meetings and online. Now, this is very different from our financial audit, which we do every single year. This is what they are referring to as a procedural audit. Our response: this recommendation will not be implemented as it is not warranted. The implementation of the grand jury's recommendations related to training and to the updating of policies should serve to ensure that elected officials are aware of their obligations. It is the responsibility of the duly elected members of the City Council to then hold themselves and each other accountable for following their own adopted policies. Separately, state law must be followed, and enforcement mechanisms related to state law already exist. And lastly, finding 7. Yucaipa City Council does not have annual trainings in current best practices of city government and within 1 month of new board members being elected, so that the new members are thoroughly trained in all aspects of a transparent city government. Our response: the City Council agrees with this finding. Recommendation 7A, the grand jury recommends that all Yucaipa City Council members receive annual training in methods and best practices of transparent city government, in person with council member interaction by a qualified entity outside of the city. Topics included would be recusal guidelines, appearance of lack of transparency, relationships with land development / entitlement companies, conflict of interest, and best practices for city government. Newly elected council members to begin training within 1 month of being elected. Response: this recommendation will be implemented in calendar year 2024 and 2025. The city manager and city clerk are already in the process of developing training programs for members of the City Council, volunteers who serve on city commissions and committees, and members of the general public who wish to better understand how local government works. These efforts predated the civil grand jury's investigation. However, as noted in finding 4, the city manager was never interviewed nor given an opportunity to inform the grand jury of this. The grand jury failed to recognize the strides that have already been made by the City Council and the new administration in the areas of transparency and training. Since the new City Council took office and the new city manager was appointed, the city has taken meaningful measures to increase transparency that were not done under previous city councils or city managers. The City Council passed the Sunshine Ordinance in March of 2023, which requires the video streaming and recording of all city council meetings, which was not done previously, posting of all public contracts that have been approved by the City Council, the development and implementation of a communications plan to increase public awareness and participation, etc. The city has been posting videos called Walk with the Mayor, which touch on different topics of importance to the community. The city has held 5 town hall community meetings on various issues, including proposed land use changes, specifically to be transparent and to seek public input. Multiple meetings have been held between the mayor and/or city staff and members of the group of residents whose complaints prompted the civil grand jury to investigate. The city has been working on implementing a new budget format, which will make the document more user-friendly and much more understandable by the general public. In reality, the city has not been more transparent at any point in its history than it has been over the past year. The new city attorney provided an in-person ethics training, which covered the Brown Act, Public Records Act, Public Reform Act, etc., that was open to the public, all city staff, elected and appointed officials. Members of the city council attended the Mayor's and Council Members Academy in January. All these are things that could have been brought to the grand jury's attention if they had interviewed me as the city manager or had given us as staff the opportunity to review the report prior to its release, both of which are authorized by the Penal Code. Recommendation 7B, this is in addition to the training already required, and we agree with that. In conclusion, the City Council is disappointed that the civil grand jury allowed itself to be drawn into a political matter by a group of local political activists primarily organized and motivated around anti-housing land use issues. While the civil grand jury found that the complaints made against the City Council was unfounded and that the City Council had acted lawfully in the selection of the city manager and approval of the Toronto Estates housing development, the civil grand jury should have exercised judicial restraint and stopped there. Instead, the civil grand jury, by opining on the city's operations without fully investigating the matters or receiving the benefit of an interview with the city manager, has had their impartial watchdog function co-opted by individuals with political motives. While the civil grand jury did interview members of the public, those individuals were apparently solely members of the Coalition to Save Yucaipa group. Members of this group are purportedly the individuals who filed the complaints with the civil grand jury. This is an organized political activist group within the city that has a website, active Facebook page, and an active campaign committee that has raised tens of thousands of dollars over the past year. This group consists of a former unsuccessful city council candidate, NIMBY anti-development interests, and members of Yucaipa's old guard who are unhappy about change at City Hall, all of who have banded together to target members of the City Council with recall attempts. This group has a clear political agenda and are not simply ordinary concerned citizens. The civil grand jury, based almost entirely on the efforts and statements of individuals in this group, was misled to believe that dissatisfaction and loss of trust in local government among residents was widespread. There is no evidence in the civil grand jury report that supports the idea that such sentiments extend beyond the Save Yucaipa political activist group. In truth, this city council has acted legally by the civil grand jury's own determination, in accordance with best practices, and has worked to make the city more transparent than at any point in its history. The civil grand jury also interviewed members of the city council, who comprise the city's policymaking body, but are not involved in the day-to-day operations of the city and are not professional municipal managers. Surprisingly, the civil grand jury failed to interview the city manager, city attorney, or most of the other local government professionals who actually run the day-to-day operations of the city and would therefore be best positioned to provide much-needed facts as well as insight on local government best practices. As a result, as the civil grand jury's final report contains material misstatements regarding the actions of the City Council pertaining to the Toronto Estates project, findings and recommendations about transparency that lack important factual information about the city's practices and progress in this area, assertions and findings that are overtly political as they are based not on well-researched facts, but on the mantra of the Save Yucaipa group, and displays a lack of understanding of a number of fundamental laws and common practices that guide municipal operations. That being said, the City Council appreciates the time and thoughtfulness the City Grand Jury put into its investigation and subsequent findings and recommendations. The city is always interested in hearing thoughts and opinions on ways we might improve our operations and the delivery of critical services to our residents. As such, we are grateful for the commitment given by those who volunteered to serve on the 2023 San Bernardino County Civil Grand Jury and for the resulting ideas that were brought forward. This is a document that would need to be not just received and filed, but actually adopted by the council and then staff directed to file with the court. Staff is here to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Prior to the discussion and vote, we have a public speaker on the matter, Mr. Ray Snodgrass.
Good evening once again, Ray Snodgrass. Honorable Mayor and council members, I couldn't have written it better. My prepared remarks echo a lot of what Mr. Mann discussed. Rather than be redundant, I'm not going to do that. I just want to say there, in my prepared remarks, I indicated, I hope your response hits the subjectivity of the report head-on with facts. It does. A more thorough investigation would have included interviews with a broader cross-section of our citizenry. Not all of us agree with many of the subjective statements contained in the report. I look forward to your official response, which we all saw just a few minutes ago. I would also invite the 2024 civil grand jury to interview the larger group of Yucaipa citizens that do not agree with a small group of complainers. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Is there a motion on the table regarding?
I found this on the web for Isdera. Check it out.
I make a motion that we,
Do you want to tell Siri that I'll have the captain escort her out if she does that again?
I was going to say Siri's out of order, Mayor.
All right.
I make a motion that we adopt the proposed response to the 2023 San Bernardino County Civil Grand Jury Report.
I'll second your motion. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Moving on to council member reports. Is there any member of this council that has any business to report?
Yes.
If it's about the bunny hop and you take my thunder, I swear, Christopher?
You know what it is.
Go ahead, sir.
We do have the bunny hop, the 30th. Plus, we have youth night on that same night, right? We have a movie that's going to be, it's kind of like a movie in the park, but they're going to be playing hop. And we have a concert coming in too, don't we? Kimberly Perry that we need to go to. How are we doing on the bunny hop so far? Do we know how many people we have?
A little over 100.
That's great. There's a egg hunt on the 30th as well, right? And then there's a night one. Isn't there a glow-in-the-dark night one? I'm sorry.
Got to agendize these in the future. Large discussions about them. Megan Wolf.
All right, so we have on March 22nd is our teen glow-in-the-dark egg hunt
There we go.
for those 13 to 17. On March 23rd is Eggstravaganza for those that are 12 and under. And I know what you guys are feeling right now. You're feeling left out, so don't you worry. Because also on March 23rd, we have our first, hopefully annual, adult glow-in-the-dark egg hunt.
Oh,
So those
nice.
that's for individuals 18 and over.
Why, thank you for not having age discrimination in our city. That makes me happy.
And then we had to take a hike this past Saturday. I guess that there was like 80 or 85 people, right?
105.
105. Holy mackerel.
Our Trails and Open Spaces Committee, you guys are rock stars with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to echo what you said so it's on the record. You said a trail cleaning day at El Dorado and Five Winds this Saturday, the 16th, from what time? 9 a.m. is when it starts there. Come help us clean up our parks, guys. All
That's
right.
all I got.
I think that was enough, sir. Anybody else?
We have a rodeo on April the 4th and 5th, and that's going to be an amazing event as well.
Always does well in the city. All right, Matt. All right. Joan? Forgive me for real quick for my sappiness. I want to wish my beautiful, talented, smart, caring 8-year-old little girl a happy birthday tomorrow. She turns 9, which is, I don't know how that happened. I just brought her home the other day, and now she's 9, and she says bruh to me, which drives me nuts. So I'm sure she'll see this later. Hadley, happy birthday, sweetie. I love you. And we'll move on from council reports to the city manager. Do you have anything to report?
Nothing additional, thank you.
Perfect. All right. At this time, I'll announce that the next regular meeting of the City of Yucaipa will be Monday, March 25th. That's a day before my birthday. I'm not turning 9. I'm turning a lot older than that. And we will see you all there. Thank you guys for engaging your city council. Have a good night.
Mayor, I did just want to announce that we are going to be reconvening back to closed session because the sole remaining item is the annual performance evaluation, and there's generally not a public report on action. I think we're going to stop the live stream. I will come out afterwards and report that there's no reportable action, if anyone wants to stay to hear that. But I did just want to put that into the record.
I already hit the gavel. So
Never mind then, strike that.
All right. The time is 8:12. Now we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.